All right. Welcome, everybody. I think we're going to get started. It's about 3 after. I see everybody in the chat saying where you're from. Appreciate you introducing yourself, sharing a little bit about yourself. I see people coming from Egypt, from Canada, from California, from Israel, from all over the world. So thanks for tuning in. Today, we're going to continue our 3-part series. We're now in part 2, Codefresh 101. We're going to be talking about GitOps and Argo. I've got my Argo mug with me, so we're ready to do it. Hey, as we go through this, if you have questions, use the Q&A button, if you would please. It allows us to keep track of questions. Shout out to Laurent and Jenny, who are going to be joining in the chat and helping answer questions. Feel free to use the chat. You know, if you just have an observation, hey, that's really cool. Oh, I'd love to hear more about that. That's interesting. I have a cousin who did this with Argo, and it really blew my mind. Whatever those observations are, we love to see them. And then as you have the Q&A, use the Q&A button. Helps keep track of the questions, and we'll answer them. Some of them live. We'll answer some of them just in the chat. And this can be really interactive, and we can go through and do a lot of stuff. Hopefully, you can all see my screen. It's pointed at this GitOps and Argo. Let me introduce myself, the agenda. We're going to introduce the topic and myself, and then go through and get into the platform and actually do an installation and deploy some applications and start automating. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Dan Garfield. I am the VP of Open Source here at Octopus Deploy now. Codefresh, of course, is a company that I helped co-found. We joined and were acquired by Octopus Deploy this last March, and it's been a really cool experience bringing these great minds together and building out our cool products together and bringing that vision together. So it's been kind of a dream come true. So excited to do that. If you don't know me, again, I am an Argo CD maintainer. I work primarily on Argo CD. I've done some contributions to Argo rollouts. Done some work with application sets recently, and done a lot of work with performance testing and scale. And then, of course, on my team, many of you have met Pasha and Reggie and Kostas, who are all maintainers, and we maintain that project. And then I also helped create Open GitOps, which we'll talk a little bit about in a moment. For those of you that are, a lot of you are very familiar with Codefresh. Just quick reiterate how we work with Argo and the open source community. So we are Argo maintainers. We're official Argo maintainers, and actually we are the first commercial version of Argo, the first enterprise version of Argo. We created ArgoCon with some others. We created the Codefresh Hub for Argo and Argo CD Autopilot. We just led the release for Argo CD Image Updater. And so we're very, very active in the community. We are the #1 security contributor, and we lead in that category and in contributions to security. And those are specifically when somebody finds a vulnerability, they report it into the Argo project. We tackle those ferociously and get those fixes out. We're guardians of the community in that way. And then, of course, we're also the #1 GitOps training and certification provider. Many of you are already GitOps certified. Give me a shout out. Give me a thumbs up if you're already GitOps certified. And of course, stick around as we get to the end of this. We are going to have some giveaways. And actually, somebody pointed out, hey, last time the screen was too small. Hopefully this time it's bigger. If it looks too small, shout it out. And if you're not following our blog, we're always publishing best practices there about how to use Argo, how to do GitOps, how to use application sets, how to do these different components. Super important. Taylor, thanks for joining in the chat. She's going to be helping answer some questions right now. You're talking to hosts and panelists. Resend that link to everybody, Taylor. I think they'll enjoy it. And of course, users love us. So GitOps as a topic. Okay, that's today's topic. We're going to talk about GitOps with Argo, with Codefresh, and how it all works. The basic premise of GitOps is pretty simple. Your desired state for your application, for your infrastructure, should be stored in Git. And you should have some kind of reconciler that's monitoring your actual state and making sure that your desired state is being applied. That's really the simplest bit of it, okay? That's the simplest understanding, clarity about what GitOps is. And you have to wonder, if my state isn't stored in Git, where is it stored? Is it just in somebody's head? Did they write it down in a document in Confluence? If you have it in Git, you can bootstrap it from Git. You can monitor the changes from Git. You can put quality gates on it. You can run tests. You can get approvals. All of a sudden, all of these things that we need to have in a DevOps world become very, very easy when you're GitOps driven. And so that's what we've built the platform around and what we're going to show you. And of course, what we're doing with Argo CD. For those of you that aren't familiar with Open GitOps, this is a project that I helped create along with GitHub, Azure, Amazon, Red Hat, Weaveworks, little hat trip to them back in the day. And the goal was to formalize those GitOps principles. If you're not familiar with this project, we had, I think, over 120 some odd contributors, 70, 80 different companies contributed to the standard, the version 1.0 standard. And of course, we moved on from there. We're increasing and doing more. And so what we're going to talk about today, everything that we're going to do is going to be GitOps driven. Okay, it's going to use GitOps. It's going to follow the GitOps principles so that everything you do in the Codefresh product is GitOps driven. And that's already first question is Codefresh is a product which includes GitOps and Argo CD included in it. That's right. So we're going to talk about Codefresh GitOps, which is a product that is built on and powered by Argo and basically the enterprise version of Argo. So let's talk about for a second, and we're going to get into demos here. Don't worry, we're going to be hands-on. We're going to be in the keyboard, but a couple of reasons why people choose Codefresh GitOps over just using the community version of Argo that we provide as an open source product. So number one, it's a supercharged version of Argo. It's packed full of additional features and improvements. You're going to see a lot of those, but there are many that we won't have time to show you that are just quality of life things that you'll notice that like times when you might make a mistake with Argo, Codefresh GitOps will probably catch that and warn you and say, hey, actually, you should be doing this way. And so there are a lot of scenarios that people run into with the community version that they probably won't run into using Codefresh GitOps. Another one is that we have a scalable control plane. So instead of just using a single Argo instance to manage a cluster or a dozen clusters or whatever, you can actually manage many Argo instances from a single control plane. And we'll show you what that looks like. And you can basically scale dramatically as you go along. We also have a unified approach to CI/CD. So CI is built in, but we also can track changes no matter what CI you're using. So we can track changes from the first commit through their build and deployment, and all of that is brought into a single interface. And so you're not jumping around between screens or tools or different products to figure out what's going on. And then, of course, we have this amazing environments and promotions features that we're going to be talking about next week. Not next week, in 2 weeks, in part 3. And we're going to focus that entirely on environments and promotions. It's one of the coolest features that we've ever built, one of the coolest products we've ever built. And it's the one I'm most excited about. So definitely come back for that. And of course, stick around to the end of this because we will have some freebies to give away. And of course, everything's being recorded. You'll get a recording. You'll get a copy of this. You'll get a copy of the slides, all that stuff. We have a lot more in-depth comparison to Codefresh GitOps versus the community version, which is just Argo CD, the plain open source. So you can check those out on our website. So let's jump into it and let's get out of the slides shortly and let's do a quick just platform introduction, and then we'll jump in and start using this thing. So let me jump over to my Codefresh screen. So you can see here I'm logged into Codefresh, and over on this sidebar, I've got my dashboard, which I'll take you through. I've got pipelines. So these are my CI/CD pipelines. I've got workflows enabled. So this is for working specifically with Argo workflows. And you can use those pipelines as well for building. And then we've got our operations components. So this is where we look at GitOps, our GitOps dashboard, and our environments and promotions components, Helm releases, all these things. And then we've got our artifacts and insights where we can track DORA metrics automatically and images as they flow through the software delivery process. So let's hide this for a second. And here you can see I've got my dashboard. I've got a couple of alerts of some components that I could go take a look at. And then I've got, of course, let's act. Oh, I'm looking. Let me go back to my dashboard here really quick. Take a sip from my Argo mug. Okay, so if I go to my dashboard, this is going to show me all the kind of roll-up stats for what's going on across my whole account in the last 7 days. So you can see from a GitOps perspective, I've got 9 clusters I'm currently managing. We're going to add one today. You can see I've got some of my applications are very busy. They have lots of deployments happening. You can see that all my deployments are being tracked. We had this down period where we were not deploying very much. We got very active again. And I can see that I've got one failed deployment that's happened over this time period. And I can filter this down and dig into it. And then if I go down to my pipelines dashboard, I'm also going to see the CI/CD activity, the executions, which ones are kind of trending and getting more important, how long their duration is, and if that's increasing. So for example, this build one has actually been going up in time frame. So that's good. So last time we talked about CI/CD. So hopefully if you're interested in CI/CD, if you missed it, that recording is available at codefresh.io/events. It's also on YouTube. I'm sure somebody's going to post it in the chat. So make sure to go and watch that. We're not going to be talking too much about CI/CD today. We'll visit it a little bit as it connects to this. So the platform overall, one of the really cool things that we do is we basically track the activity, again, from first commit all the way through deployment and beyond, as those things are successful or rolled back. And so at any given time, you can see exactly what's going on for any of your clusters, any of your applications, any of your Argo instances, no matter how many you have, wherever they are, and it's going to scale with you. So here, I'm only using 9 clusters, but I could have 1,000, I could have 5,000 connected. So, and it's going to scale with that and track it and give me all that visibility that I want. So that's just a little intro into the platform. So let's get into installing Argo using Codefresh GitOps. And so to do this, once you are logged into your account, you're going to go up to settings, and it'll actually prompt you to do this as part of like the kind of onboarding experience. But if you ever need to find it again, it's under this runtimes, GitOps runtimes. And you can see that I currently have 2 runtimes. Now, one of them is a Codefresh hosted. So if you don't want to run Argo yourself, you actually can have Codefresh host it for you. You can actually just click, just give me an instance and start deploying, connect your clusters, and you're off to the races. And you don't have to have that on your own cluster at all. There are some limitations to that with what you can do and how flexible it is. But as far as like getting stuff deployed and running, works great. Now you can see I have another runtime here called GitOps, and this is one that has most of the clusters connected to it. If I look at my topology view, you're going to see that, oh my gosh, yeah, I actually have in this GitOps one, I have a whole bunch of clusters connected here, and I can get all the different kind of domains that those are on and details on those. I could dig into them. Now we're going to add a runtime. And we're going to talk about this config runtime thing too, that's labeled here in a bit, but so we'll come back to it. So let's go ahead and hit add runtime. You can see I already have a hosted runtime, so it's going to prompt me to do a hybrid runtime. The way that a hybrid runtime works is, and I'll explain it more in depth in a second, that's going to deploy a basically Argo CD, Argo rollouts, Argo workflows, Argo events, along with some other components into my own cluster. And we're going to take advantage of that. So before I actually kick that off, I should create my cluster. So let me do that. Where are my notes for what I'm doing? So I'm gonna do a kind create cluster here. Right now, all I can see are all I can see is everybody telling me that they want to all I can see are the chats. So I'll find my notes here in a second. But at any rate, so I'm going to go ahead and create a cluster, and this one, I'm just going to create a kind cluster for this demo. But of course, you could be doing this on GKE. You could be using AWS. You could be doing any kind of cluster, and we're going to use that as our basis. So I've kicked off the cluster creation. Let's go ahead and open this runtime. Now, when you go to create an installation, what this is going to do, here it is, I got it all set up. All right. What this is going to do is it's actually going to prompt you to generate an API key. Now, if I click this button, it's going to show you an API key that I just generated, and everybody in the chat is going to be off to the races to go and steal my API key. So let's not do that. I've already generated it. Now, when you do that, you also can customize the runtime values. If you've used Argo Helm charts before, this is going to look very familiar because we actually use an umbrella chart that consumes the child chart. So one of the questions that Jadip is asking is, hey, can I deploy using HA and not just normal Argo CD? You totally can. That's just one of the options you would just pass in that value. And it's going to generate for you a Helm install command that is going to include your token automatically once you generate it, and some runtime names and other things, and then it's just going to wait for it to install. So I'm going to be doing that, and I've already prepared this. I've got a little, let's see, I just need to run, I need to import my variables, so I need to source them. So I made a little script that will just set up my variables for me so that I don't have to show them to you. So that's going to keep us all safe and sound, which will be great. So to install this, I'm going to use my Helm upgrade command, and it's also using my fresh cluster. As you can see, I've got a fresh cluster here that just started. So let's use the Helm upgrade command. It's going to consume in those variables, and it's going to start that Helm install. Now, one of the differences here versus using the normal community Helm chart is we actually have a job that's going to run, and it's going to check your cluster for any issues, any compatibility issues that'll flag it for you and say, hey, you're missing volumes, or you're missing some component, or it's not going to work, or there's something that's missing, and it will just flag that for you, and you can start doing it. Now, once this deploys, it's going to take a minute or so for those resources to actually start. So while it's doing that, I wanted to share a little bit about the architecture here. So yeah, we created our cluster, we generated the Helm install, and now we're ready for resources to start. So the architecture that we're using here is called the hybrid install. And if we look at this, let's just click on it really quick. If we look at this, the way that this install works, here we go. So you've got the Codefresh GitOps platform. This is the control plane that's going to control all your instances. Now, if you want to self-host that, you totally can. Everything can be self-hosted. You don't have to have us host anything. We don't need access to anything. But this model here, by default, that we're using is Codefresh is hosting the control plane. It's a zero trust control plane. So all your sensitive components stay on your own infrastructure. And so this model is actually used by defense companies, banks, by all kinds of people who find that this is a very robust security model. Of course, if you do want to host it all on-prem, that's totally fine. We have some European people, especially, that like to do that for compliance reasons. But we actually are going to host an ingress here for the instance. And one of the funny things about this I've seen is that we've had some customers who come to us and they're deploying, they have a lot of Argo instances, and when they switched and start using this, they use a single shared ingress, and suddenly they find that they're just saving a bunch of money on ingress because there's a hosted ingress that is providing this. Now, the instance that we're running on here is egress only, so it's sending traffic data out, but it's not expecting anything back in. So that allows it to be very robust and secure. So this local install that you can see, it just popped up. It's completed. And now that I have this is just running on my laptop, right? But I didn't have to set up any special networking or anything like that. So let's go to this, and it's prompting me to complete installation. So it's going to want a couple of things. First, the runtime itself is going to want a Git token. And this Git token is going to allow it to pull in and read from my account and everything. And so to get that, I'm going to pull out a token and put it in here. And this one should be something that is specific to the environment. And I'll go ahead and update those credentials. Now, that's going to actually add it to the cluster specifically. It's not going to be stored by Codefresh. You can see it's also prompting me to add a Git personal access token. And what this is essentially for my UI. So as I'm interacting and doing things from a Git perspective, it's going to be storing this. Essentially, my browser is going to be executing some Git commands And so I'm going to put in a different token typically. Now, I actually have the same token for both for the demo, but in general, this token is personal to me. The other one is specific to the environment. These can be scoped to a specific repository or set of repositories. That's totally fine. Of course, this is going to work with GitHub or GitLab or whatever. You also have the option, if your admin sets up single sign-on, you can just click single sign-on and it will set up auth for you, all in a predictable, expected way. Okay. And then the last thing that it wants is to configure the runtime as an Argo application, and it will actually already be done. So it's actually already done because the configuration for this demo that I'm giving you was set up in Git ahead of time. It would prompt and look exactly the same. It just wouldn't throw that error. So it's just showing that error, that it's just saying that it's already been completed. That's fine. Now, because I've actually already done this one and it already exists in Git, it actually is going to pick up some configuration for me. But you can see it's picking up all of the components that are installed. And you can see that there's some components that are still progressing. One of them is sealed secrets. Now, there's some confusion sometimes when people use Codefresh because we include sealed secrets. Sealed secrets is going to allow us to bootstrap and recover information. So if our instance was lost, I can go back and recover it instantly, and it will be deployed and rocking and rolling. We'll be good to go. But this doesn't mean you have to use sealed secrets as your secrets provider. Almost all of our users, all of our customers use, external secrets or a Terraform provider, or sorry, not the Terraform provider, but the Vault Terraform provider operator for their stuff. So anyway, there's a bunch of options there, right? So now I've got this installed, right? And we've looked at the architecture for a moment and just talked about that, which hopefully is providing some clarity. So now we've completed our installation. We're ready to start deploying. And let me look at this question from Akos before we move on. I asked if GitOps works with hooks and pre-commit hooks. So I think you're talking specifically about like pre-commit Git hooks, not like Helm hooks. Depending on what you're doing, it can. And we definitely do see people that use like pre-commit hooks to do specific things. So yeah, those are totally fine, and you can still use those. They should essentially be passed through to the whole process. Yeah, great question. Okay. So now we've got this installed. What are we getting for it? And how do we actually deploy and start using it? So let's go back to my menu here, and I'm going to go to my GitOps apps. And you can see that I do have a couple of things that are already deployed or deploying. So if you look through here on my GitOps dashboard, I have a number of runtimes. And I'll talk about some of these other ones. Let's look at the local install. This is the one that we just set up. And this one already had a Git source associated with it. And I'll talk about that in just a second and how that worked. But the way that this has picked up, you can see that it's got a couple of applications that are already either deployed or in a state of progressing. So we're good there. Now, if you've used Argo CD before, this is going to look very familiar. This is a view of applications. I like to use the list view quite a bit. This is nice because you can do nested applications and see what's going on. But let's use the card view for now, because this is the one that most people are familiar with. But when I jump into here, you can see that I've got my source and what the last update was and where it's deployed. You can see this one is actually part of a parent app. It has a parent app called Fresh Install, which is essentially an app of apps. And you can see which namespace it's in. And if I click into this guy, you're going to be able to see a view of all the resources that are here. And I could jump in and I can look at the pods, and I could pull the logs, for example. Now, again, this is on my laptop. I haven't set up any special networking. This is all just set up as the agent that's part of the GitOps install that's reporting the information, and I'm getting it back. And it's pretty performant, and I'm getting my events. So I can do all the stuff that I would expect to be able to do, and I can debug and figure out if something went wrong or whatever. But we introduced a couple of other concepts that I'm going to show you in a second. So let's go and actually look at how to deploy applications. So there's a couple of of components with how we interact with Git that are unique and interesting. So the first is this concept of what's called a shared configuration repository. Sometimes it's abbreviated as ISC. You'll see that in documentation. This is a Git repository with all your Codefresh configuration, and it's used by all instances. So the reason when I installed this, I did this fresh install, I specifically was referencing a configuration that already existed in my shared configuration repository. And all that did is it bootstrapped some apps for me. Now, if I hadn't done that, it just wouldn't have bootstrapped the apps. Everything else would have been the same. So you're not missing out. It was just for the sake of some time, and we'll deploy an application. The next concept is that of a Git source. And if you're familiar with Argo CD, this is essentially a parent application. This is an app of apps. So this is just pointing at a place where we expect to find application configuration that we can use to deploy things. And then, of course, applications and application sets are the workhorse of the whole thing. So if you have an application that describes where you want the source of truth to be and where you want it to go, and the sync policies and all those kinds of things. And of course, application sets allow you to programmatically generate applications. So for example, you can say with an application set very easily, for every pull request that I have, generate these applications, and you can basically generate applications on the fly. And Jadip is asking for me to elaborate on app of apps, and I'll talk about that too. So let's go into our GitOps apps, and let's actually deploy an application, okay? And the way that we're going to do that right now is we're just going to use the UI. So we're going to hit Add Application, and there are going to be some, if you're an Argo user, there are going to be some interesting distinctive differences here that you should pick up on right away. So don't tune out because you've seen the application you've seen the Add Application UI before in Argo CD. So let's do we're going to do guest book, but we're going to do the customized version. And I'm going to select my local install runtime. And oh, I already have one there. So let's do a second one. I thought I had deleted that one. Did I not delete that one? Oh, it's right here. Oh, okay. So maybe I should delete this one. Let's delete it really quick. That'll be that's a good thing to show too. So this is actually going to delete this application. It's actually going to be making a commit in my repository and triggering that to happen. Now, if you're just using the community version of Argo CD, one of the very first things you need to do after you kind of get a feel for it is go and remove the ability of people to use the UI to do anything. Because if you do let people use the UI, you're going to get out of sync with Git really quick, because every time they create an application, it just dumps into a namespace. It doesn't save that configuration anywhere. Let's see, Chitan is asking a question. He says, you're not answering my question. He says, hi, currently the companies are using GitHub and or GitLab and other tools. Then why those companies need to adopt Codefresh, GitOps along or on top of that? Okay, so that's actually a good question. So we work with GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket. These are source management tools, right? And so for managing your source, they're the best. We expect you to use them. We don't manage source control for you, right? We don't provide GitHub for you, right? We expect you to bring your GitHub. What Codefresh is doing, though, is it's monitoring what's happening in Git. It's manipulating what's happening in Git. It's deploying your applications. It's monitoring what's actively happening. So we're actually dealing with all the software delivery side of the equation, and using Git as a source of truth. So that's a good question. Okay, so we got that deleted. Let's go ahead and create our application now. Let's do guestbook customize. And we're going to deploy it to this specific runtime, local install. Now, again, if I could have 1,000 Argo instances here, right, and I'd be working with them. I can specify where the YAML should be stored. We're just going to use the default for the moment. We'll talk about that. Now, I have this concept of a group. A grouping is basically applications that you want to track their deployment together. And we're gonna leave it out of a group, but I'll show you a group in a minute. Let's go ahead and put in an example repository. And I'm going to select the customize guest book folder that has guest book generated by customize. And I'm going to deploy this into a namespace, and I'll call this one, let's see, guest book customize. Okay. And when I do that, I'm going to leave automatic sync policy on. So this is going to automatically sync what's in Git with what's in the what's in my environment. I'm going to automatically prune resources. So if I delete it in Git, I want it to automatically delete. This can sometimes be dangerous to set because you might accidentally delete things. So there are scenarios where you want to use it and scenarios where you don't. We're going to use it today. I'm also going to use self-heal. So if a resource is modified in my live state and it departs from what's in my desired state, it's actually going to automatically correct that. So that's an advantage that I want to have, and I want to do that. So we're going to do that. I'm also going to, I'm not going to allow empty. This is basically for covering for some different deletion scenarios. We don't have to get too much into it. I'm going to auto create the namespace. If it doesn't exist, it'll create it. I'm going to leave server-side apply off. I'm just going to do client-side apply. Server-side apply is useful in a lot of scenarios for specific use cases where you want to allow certain hooks to run and things like that. We don't need to worry about it. So there's a number of options here, right? Now, when I get to the end of this, I'm going to go ahead and commit it. And it's going to give me a preview where it's going to show me all the components that are changing. I'm zoomed in quite a bit so you can see easily. So it doesn't, looking at the configuration here is a little bit wonky, but here you can see it if I zoom out. This is the custom resource it's generating for me. And I'm going to do create guest book customize. All right, and you can see that it has a Git source specifically that it's looking for that's associated with this instance, and it's automatically filtered that and found it for me. So when I commit this, it's going to go to the Git source that I already set up, and it's going to commit that. Now, if I look at this fresh install app, this is my Git source here. So if I look in at my source here, you can see I have a Git repo set up. And we just generated this guestbook customized YAML that has been committed into the repository, okay? And this repository structure for a Git source can be totally customized, so you can specify specific folders and specific things like that you want to have. And you can see that this has picked up the YAML that I just created, this guestbook customize, and I can go to this app and jump straight into it. And it's going to show me, again, what's going on. And I can look at the timeline, and this is going to show me that we just created a deployment. Now, I previously had this app and I deleted it, but I recreated it with the same name. So it's picked up that there was a previous version, and it's noticed that that history is still there. Okay, now this release timeline is super powerful, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But let's pause there for a second, because we just created an application. We generated it in Git first. And let's look at some of these questions. So Jadeep was asking me to elaborate on the app of apps. So that's what we were just looking at. This is when we looked at that fresh install application. This is an application that just contains application manifests. So that allows me to just manage them all as a single Git source. And I basically just, if I add that Git source, it's going to pick up any of the applications there and deploy them. And then they are going to go and then deploy their manifests. So that's the answer to that question. The other question is, how do we quality gate with autosync? For instance, a prod deployment that requires manager approval. That's a great question. So there are two ways to do that. One is you don't allow the commit to go forward until it has been approved. And you can do that using a pipeline. And I can show you what that looks like. The other answer is you don't use autosync and you use manual sync instead. And of course, the third option, and this is the best option, is to use environments and promotions. So when you're using the promotions feature in Codefresh, you can actually set up a quality gate that requires approval or whatever. And before that component is added, it has to go through those quality gates. That's going to be something that we show in 2 weeks. So we're not going to show that today. So definitely come back and come to the next part in the webinar series, so you can see how that's going to work. So these questions around promotions and changes are all going to be very in-depth answered there. Okay. So we've gone ahead and deployed this. We've explained these Git sources. So let's talk for a moment about some of these other components that I mentioned. So I mentioned groups earlier. And let's look at this Trio app group that I have that already exists. And this one is very instructive. So what we've done here is it groups applications that are related. And you can see that there is a release timeline here that's showing me that today there were quite a few releases that happened among these applications. Now, this is made up of a couple of applications, right? It's made up of Trio App Prod, Trio App QA, and Trio App Dev. So I have, and Trio App Staging. So I have 4 different applications, and these are kind of in a life cycle. Now, the other really useful thing for a timeline, this is tracking an application and its whole life cycle, but you can also use this for closely related applications. So for example, if a change to application A could cause a regression in application B, you might put those in a timeline. So when a regression happens, you can just look at the timeline and you can see, oh, my regression started yesterday at this time. Oh, I had a failed deployment at that time. I can see that was Trio App Dev. I can jump straight to this deployment and figure out what was going on there. And it looks like it was 19 hours ago, and I'm going to jump into it. Now, check this out, because this whole concept is really interesting, and it adds a lot to the whole equation. Now, I can see that I actually did a Canary release and that it did a rollback. So one of the people asked earlier, hey, is this just Argo CD? Is this Argo workflows? Is this Argo rollouts? It's everything. So it's Argo rollouts as well. I can see that this is successfully rolled back after a failed deployment. And if I look at the experiment here that ran, it's going to show me that when this deployment was happening, it had a few steps it was following. Might take a second. Well, we might actually go look at another one. Let's look at one from today. We can just look at this promotion here. So here in this update, there were 2 different microservices updated. Okay, this control one and this Flask one. And if I look at the it should show me my rollout process. You can see it implied with how the rollout happened here. But basically, it did a deployment and it did some quality checks. And then as it progressed in a Canary release, it moved on and marked it as successful. Now, because these 2 services were updated, I mentioned at the very beginning of this, remember, I said Codefresh tracks everything from the very first commit all the way to when it's deployed, right? So what we've done here is these 2 images were updated, right? And when these 2 images were updated, it has pulled from these 2 images all kinds of relevant information. So it says these 2 images were actually built by a single CI pipeline. And these are the 3 people that contributed to this. And you can see that they each have some commits associated with it. Look, there's 2 different pull requests that were involved. And there's actually 2 different Jira issues that were being worked on. So if I can jump straight into this pull request and see that Laurent was the one that commented on this, even though he didn't make a commit on it. And I can see that they were adding this Python function to this thing. And so I know exactly what was being worked on. And I could also jump straight into Jira. I'm probably not logged into Jira. And it would show me the issue of what was being worked on, as well as this committer information. Let's jump into this CI build component here for a second too. And this will be a good way for us to start talking about automation, okay? So this is the CI pipeline that built this image. I can see it cloned the repo, it built a Docker image, added some tags. And one of the things that it did is it has this step that does reporting. And this is what adds all of the information that we're seeing onto the image and allows it to be tracked through its entire life cycle. And this step is available for GitHub Actions, for Jenkins. If you're using some other CI provider, not Codefresh CI, you can still get all this information. We have a lot of customers who come to us and they say, hey, I've got 10,000 Jenkins, jobs that I run. I don't want to convert all of them into Codefresh CI to be able to get all of that inside information. How can I do them? We say, hey, here's the step. Just add it to your jobs, and you're good to go. And it's going to tag those images. Now, so let's talk about automating deployment here for a second. So we deployed an application. So we gave you an introduction to the platform. We're going pretty fast. I hope everybody's following along. If you need me to slow down, slow down. But keep those questions coming. Keep the comments coming. Let's talk about automated deployment for a second and how that works. So what we recommend as a pattern. Now, you don't have to do this. Everything I've shown you is very configurable, so you can go off the reservation if you want to. But everything I've shown you is by default set up in such a way that it'll just work. And if you want to tweak it and do something different to adapt to a different scenario, you can totally do that. But you also don't have to think about all that stuff necessarily just to start using it. So what we recommend is what we call a 2-repo pattern. Okay, and we've written about this. If you've done the GitOps certification, you should be very familiar with this pattern. But I've got a repository with my application code, and I've got a separate repository with my runtime code. Okay, so my app code is where I'm making code changes. So that repo I just showed you a second ago. Let's go over here. So I've got this application repo where I'm building applications. Now, I actually have multiple applications in this repo, right, that I'm writing code for. But this repo structure means that I can work independently on applications, and then when I'm ready, I can trigger a deployment. So I'm a lot of times we see people try to shove their Kubernetes manifests into the app repo, and that causes a couple of issues. One, you can't very easily bootstrap recovery from a main repository, your infrastructure. So that's one problem. Another problem is that you have linked application level changes with infrastructure level changes, and you can accidentally cross those streams sometimes when you really don't want to. And so that can cause issues. So we recommend for that and a variety of other reasons to keep them separate. Laurent has just posted an excellent blog post explaining how you should structure your Git repositories. So definitely follow that. Now, what we're going to do is, as we make a change to the app code, we're going to automatically do our tests, and we're going to generate manifests, and then we will generate a pull request onto our runtime Git repository. And this is the repository that GitOps is actually watching and then deploying changes from. So that pattern is extremely powerful. If you follow it, it makes your life a lot easier. And we can just follow that change, for example, here. So here I've got my application repo. And let's just look at our commits here for a second. And we're going to see that we had a commit here that happened. And we had some jobs that ran on it. So let's click on that. And it's going to show me that I ran this DevOps build job. So if I open this up, it's going to take me to my pipeline that executed. And I was showing you a very similar one that ran not too long ago. And here, we build our Docker image, we run our unit tests, we sign the image, we do all this stuff. Now, if this is new looking to you, then you missed the last session we did on CI/CD, where we explained all the benefits of using these pipelines. You can do shared pipelines. You can create one pipeline that works for hundreds of resources. And this is all just generated with YAML. Saliyah is asking to see an example manifest file. So this is showing like the build step, what Docker registry is pushing for. It's using some variables. This pipeline is cool because it is a shared pipeline that works with many microservices. So we don't have to redefine the same thing over and over again. Now, the last thing in this step that it does is it's going to generate changes for me. It's actually going to do this by it's going to trigger a new pipeline to run. And this is a separate pipeline that is just focused on building manifests. So this is going to basically bump our Helm version, our chart version. It's going to get the images that should be deployed, and then it's going to create a pull request. And we have a built-in step for doing that So you can see that which manifests, are passed in here and what it's going to be executing, and how that works. So this is going to then push it into our GitOps repo. Now let's go look at our GitOps repo for a second. And of course, this is all tracked from the this is all tracked directly from the application as well. So you can see it there. But this is our GitOps repo that has all of our applications and all our manifests. And so when we trigger a deployment, you can see that it actually here it opened a pull request. This one has since been merged, that was bumping an app version and triggering changes to those images. And of course, we could see all of that directly from our GitOps dashboard, right? So that we were looking at a second ago. So if we go back over to our GitOps apps, for example, and we can look at our group, we could find the applications directly, but let's look at that Trio app. And we look at this last deployment that happened. It looks like we had one that actually just happened 2 minutes ago. If we jump into this change, it's going to show us, the change that it's slightly newer than the one we were just looking at, but you get the idea. So this is super powerful. Now, for generating these manifests, you've got a couple of options. CI pipelines work great. That's a very popular option. If you want to use Argo CD image updater, you can totally use that. In fact, you can really use anything to update the manifest. Now, Codefresh does have an amazing tool for taking those changes and promoting them and validating them across multiple environments. And we're going to talk about that next week. So if I just to give you the quickest of previews, this is what we're going to get into next week, of how we promote things from dev, QA, staging, and production, and how that works. That's going to be in 2 weeks. So definitely come back and for that, because it's going to blow your minds with how this works. And it's just super, super powerful. So one of those features I'm super proud of. But before we go into that, and we're going to do that in 2 weeks, I wanted to show you another component here in images. So this is tracking all of the images that are under management in Codefresh. And one of the cool things about this is, for example, if I'm looking at this Flask UI application and I click on this, it's showing me that it's currently deployed in about 4 different places, this image. And there are different versions of this image deployed. Let's see, my internet might be running a little slow because I prioritized the Zooms. It might be slowing me down. But what it's going to show me is where it's deployed. And so you can see I have these different applications. I can jump straight specifically to those, and I can see which versions of this tag are running. And I can drill down. And so, for example, if I was like, oh, I know that there's an image that has a vulnerability in it, I can instantly see all the places it's deployed. And I can see the entire life cycle of what it's connected to and what it's done, where it's going. And there we go. This one loaded relatively quickly. Now it's a little funky because I am zoomed in quite a bit, but basically it's showing me my images here. And let's jump into this one that's currently deployed. It's deployed in these 3 different places. Whoa. It's actually kind of hard to look at zoomed in like this. I thought it would be helpful it might be helpful for you to be able to see what's on there, but Jenny said my screen sharing might have stopped. Can you all still see my screen?
Yes, we can, Dan. It seems to be working for me.
All right. So this is showing me that it's deployed in Docker Hub. It's sent to Docker Hub. It's got a Jira issue associated with it. All that information that I showed you earlier on the dashboard is associated here, and I can see what built it. So I have provenance. Now, somebody asked, does Codefresh automatically do vulnerability scanning by default? It won't automatically do it for you. You can set it up to do that very easily. So that is an option that you can use, and you can have it show red flags and things up here. It's also going to show me what the Docker file was that built it. It's going to show me all the layers that were associated with it. So lots of visualization tools and things to keep you aware of what's going on. And then we also automatically calculate DORA metrics. Again, I mentioned we track everything from the initial Git commit to when it's deployed. So that means I can automatically get DORA metrics to show me how frequently I'm deploying, how long it takes me to get a change into production on average, what my change failure rate is, how long it takes for me to restore service if something goes down. And I can drill into different runtimes, different clusters, specific applications, and get all that information. So I have total clarity about what's happening, where it's happening, how it's happened. And it's very, very powerful in that way. Now, we've gone through and we've done this process right now, right? So we had this commit that we followed through that was then deployed and made it into production, and we were able to see all that. And again, from a GitOps tooling standpoint, the times when this really shines, especially are if you're dealing with downtime and you're trying to figure out what was going on, having everything sitting there and clear in a timeline view, you know exactly what's deployed. You can look at the logs. You can correlate a change with a regression. You can do a rollback. All that stuff is there and visible and available to you. It's super powerful. Progressive delivery is built right in. We didn't really spend a lot of time on that, but it is. So that's going to conclude our demos. I'm amazed that we were able to get that done in 50 minutes. We went really fast, and hopefully people followed it. It wasn't stressful. But next steps, definitely, if you haven't, you can book an in-depth demo for you at codefresh.io/request-a-demo and get set up and start a conversation about adopting Codefresh GitOps. If you're already using Argo, you can do a very, very easy migration to adopt this. That's very powerful. And definitely sign up for a free account, free trial if you haven't. Now, to get GitOps certified, and we're going to take some questions here, so keep them coming, but go to learning.codefresh.io. And for all of you today, I have this code, IHeartGitOps, all lowercase, that will give you free level 1 and level 2 certification. If you have not done the certification, it is probably the most important, impactful thing that you can do to improve your GitOps skills and get going. So this certification I definitely recommend, and then happy to take some questions. I see Laurent has been busily answering them in the chat. Let's see if there's any that we should be calling out. Do you have a webinar on how we integrate Jira into the CI/CD process? So we do have a YouTube video that Laurent has shared with everybody that you can watch how it's done. It's also, of course, in our documentation. It's pretty easy. I see somebody's asking if there's going to be a recording. There absolutely will be, and we're going to share it. We showed you some example manifest files. We talked about quality gates on autosync and how that works. We talked about Argo rollouts a little bit, and we compared some Argo CD and everything else. Cool. So it looks like we were able to answer a lot of those questions. So now, of course, next step, I want you to come to the environments and promotions section on September 3rd. This is where we're going to show you how you really take it to the next level. Now, a lot of the stuff that we did today and a lot of stuff we looked at, if I wasn't doing GitOps, then everything you saw should be like, okay, wow, I need to go do this because this is a better way to be deploying software. It's more reliable. And we didn't necessarily get into a lot of the nuances of why GitOps is super effective. I kind of had some assumption going in here that you had some context there, and we could definitely do a session on that at some point. But if you were an Argo user, Argo CD user already, what we've already shown you should make you think, wow, I would love to have this kind of interface, this kind of level of clarity about what's going on, the ability to manage my instances this way. When we talk about instance management, we created an instance, we created a cluster, we installed that. I can actually, if there was a security issue, it would alert me and say, hey, go upgrade that immediately. And it would give me a one-click command to go and do that was GitOps driven. So it's from the repository. If my Codefresh account was nuked tomorrow, I could go back and rebootstrap everything from the Git repo that it has generated and tracked all my changes in. So all of that is happening behind the scenes. We didn't really even look at it. But all that, okay, is super compelling, I think. But when we get into environments and promotions, it's going to melt some faces. I mean, people are going to, like, I don't know if you've ever seen the reactions that people had to the Beatles. That's what people look like when they see environments and promotions in action, how it works. And you can promote things from dev to staging to production, but you can promote stuff from US East to US West to Region 1, Region 2, Region 3 to Region 500. and it's super powerful. It has some really cool tooling for doing diffing on the fly that allows you to figure out what should be promoted. Approvals, testing, all that stuff is built into the process. So it's really going to supercharge your software delivery. So with that, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this session on Codefresh 101. I hope you will come and join us again in 2 weeks for the session on environments and promotions. And hopefully it gets you going to actually start working with this. And send some feedback of more things you want to see. Akko says, I'd love to see how GitOps works with Terraform and do promotions across different environments. So we're actually going to show some of that in 2 weeks. So definitely come to that one. And with that, thank you so much. And shout out to Jenny, to Laurent, to Taylor, all of those people who were in the chat, helping answering questions. Shout out to all of you for asking questions, being engaged. It makes this a lot more fun. And feel free to share this code with your coworkers, with your friends. There is a limited number of these codes, and there's a limited timeline to acquire them. I think there's about 50 of them. So get out there and get those claimed immediately. The race is on. If you don't get it this time, come back in 2 weeks. We'll have some more freebies for you. And with that, we'll see you next time. Thank you so much. Great having you, and appreciate you. Take care.